This video will discuss content from Murach, chapter 4. We're going to talk about repetition or loops in Java. So there's really three basic loops in Java that we're going to be using, or that we're going to be talking about. One is a while loop, the other is a do while loop, and then there's a for loop. So we're going to run through the syntax of those real quick and when and how you would use each one. And then there will be some examples in subsequent videos. So this is the basic syntax of a while loop. You have the keyword while, the reserved word, then you have a Boolean expression, and then you have an opening and closing block with statements in the middle. So this means while this expression is true, do these statements. And so the execution order of this is that the while loop will evaluate the Boolean expression. If the expression is true, it will enter the block and execute the statements top to bottom. Once those statements have ended, we will loop back around, reevaluate the Boolean expression. And if that Boolean expression is still true, we'll then execute the statements again. So it is possible that the statements will execute 0 times if the while loop is not true on the first iteration. So a while loop will run from 0 to n times, depending on how long that expression is valid. Here's an example. If we set a value of, we create a variable I, we set it to 1, we create months equals 36. We say while I less than or equal to months, then we do this calculation. This is an accumulation calculation, and then we increment the value of I. So this means that that I will go up by 1 because we're using the incrementer here. I will go up by 1 at the end of every iteration of this loop. And so in this case, this will run I will equal 1, then this value runs, and then I is plus plus, and so now I is 2. This value runs again, I is 3, 3 is still less than or equal to 36, etc., until I has a value of 37, which is no longer less than or equal to 36. And then the statement ends. And then the while loop ends. So it's important in a while loop that that you make sure that that you're going to get out of the loop. So you've got to make sure that something inside the loop is going to cause this Boolean expression to be false at some point. A while loop is perfect for when you don't know how many times you want to do something. You are unsure what's going to change the loop. This could be user input. This could be some accumulation value reaching a level, but you don't know how many times you want to do the loop. While loop is perfect for those types of applications. It is possible to create an infinite loop if you just use while true, which we will actually use in some cases. And if this loop will never end, I mean, this loop will run until something inside the loop causes it to stop. So we can put a break statement inside the loop, or we can, if the while true loop is inside a method, we can exit the while loop and the method using a return statement. So there are some situations where you would code what looks like an infinite loop. You just want to make sure that there is a way to break out of it at some point. So this is the syntax of a do while loop. This works basically the same as a while loop, with one caveat in that all the statements run one time before the Boolean expression is evaluated. So as in a while loop, we evaluate the expression and then we run the statements. In a do while, we run the statements and then we evaluate the expression. So the statements will always run at least once, whereas in a while loop, it's possible that you won't run the statements at all. I personally don't use this very often. In the do while, I just use a while loop typically with that and prime that Boolean expression the way I want. So this is here. If you want to use it, you are more than welcome to do so. Here is the same code that we saw before in the while loop, just structured differently with using a do while. And so this is an application using an exit. Do you want to continue? Yes or no? So this is just a loop that will prompt one time and ask, do you want to exit? And it will just continue until you say yes. So again, this is not, you'll see this in the textbook. This is not the do while is not a common structure that I use. Here is a for loop. A for loop is a perfect loop for when you know about how many times you want to do something. So maybe you have an array and you want to do You want to do a set of statements for every element in the array, which we're going to talk about in upcoming weeks. Or maybe you know that you want to do a for loop, 10 times or once for every, maybe the user tells you I want to do 10, or, anytime you kind of know how many times you want to do something, a for loop is there. The key difference in the for loop and in the while loop is the way that the incrementer is used. So we can see a for loop requires 3 expressions to define it and initialize it. One is the initialization expression, which initializes a counter on the for loop. The middle expression is a Boolean expression that says when the for loop will end. And then the increment expression says, what do I do to the counter? So here, these are defining a counter, saying what the Boolean terminator should be, and then what do I do at the end of each loop, and then statements in the middle. So here's an example of one. This is defining a variable named I. I and J are very commonly used as counters for for loops. Sometimes you'll use count if that makes sense in your context, but I, J, count, these are common variables that you'll see there. So this is a for loop. It's got the 3 initialization steps. Int I equals 0. This is defining a variable named I, and it's initializing it to the value of 0. This says run the for loop as long as I is less than 20, and then at the end of each iteration, increment I by 1 using the plus operator. This is really common. You're going to see this all over the place in a lot of for loops. This structure, starting I at 0 or 1, some maximum value of I, and the incrementer. We will write this code dozens of times throughout this course. Note that when you use a for loop like this, that this is defining I as a variable. It is defined locally within the block of this for loop. So I does not exist before the for loop, and it does not exist after the for loop. So you can only use I inside the for loop. Here, the example is system.out.print with I. If I tried to print I here outside the for loop after the for loop is closed, then I would get a not defined error, because I is only defined inside this for loop, because I'm defining it here on the definition of the for loop. And then this is, of course, the output of the loop. And again, notice that we're using the print here. So all of these numbers are being printed on one line instead of on separate lines. Here's another example. This for loop is actually counting backwards. So in this case, we're starting at 8, and we're saying continue as long as I is greater than 0, and then we're using a decrementer here instead of an incrementer, subtracting 2. So I will be 8, 6, 4, and 2. And then when I is equal to 0, this Boolean expression will no longer be true, and the for loop will end. So you can count a for loop either forwards or backwards. Either one works. You just got to make sure that your incrementer or decrementer will eventually make the Boolean expression true. It's possible if this Boolean expression was I greater than or less than 0, or well, that's not a great example. But if it is possible that you can have an incrementer here that makes the for loop never end. So for example, if this was I is less than less than 20, but you did an I minus here, then that would turn into an infinite for loop. So you always got to make sure that whatever your decrementer is eventually going to make the Boolean expression come out false. Here's the same structure that we saw in the while loop earlier, using a for loop, initializing I to 1, I is less than or equal to months, and with an incrementer on I. You can use a for loop without braces, but you shouldn't do this. This will make you forget things and cause errors. So always use the braces whenever you're doing a loop of any kind, or in a statement or any other block. So this will work. This is a for loop with one statement. So if you only have a single statement in your for loop, you technically don't need the braces. But I personally feel like this is really a really bad habit, and you should avoid doing that. You can put a break inside a loop, inside a while loop, which will cause the loop to end and just pop out to the end of the block. So in this case, while true, This will just run until the user enters until the user enters the word exit. This is what's known as a sentinel. So in this case, we're asking you to enter data, and we're looking for the special value of exit to say, I don't want to be in this program anymore, at which point you would pop out. So you can see what it looks like down here. They enter blue. The next time he enters, the user enters exit, then the program ends. So that this is an infinite loop while true, but it will run until the user enters this word, and then we execute this break line, which causes the while loop to end. So this is the exact structure that we'll be using while true loops in, to prompt the user to do things, and then to enter a sentinel value, or a sentinel value rather, to exit the program or exit the loop. Okay, you can also use a continue statement if you want to just finish the loop, finish that iteration of the loop, and just go back to the beginning. Continue is what does that. This will not be used. This will not be very common in our class, but just know that it's there. All right. Subsequent videos will have some examples for you to follow through.